You said something that actually stuck with me. You said you were doing all these things, all the self-sacrificial things, because it was just the only way you knew how to be. Like, it
Mm.
reminds me, I read a book a while back, The Mountain Is You by Brianna Weiss. It's all about self-sabotage. And she says in the book, oftentimes we think that we want more of what will make us happy, but actually we just want more of what's familiar to us. Sometimes
Mm.
we keep doing these negative cycles, bad habits, just because we want success, we want positive things, but we actually just don't feel comfortable once we get closer to it. So we kind of keep going back to this negative cycle of self-sabotage, self-sacrificing. So how do
Yes.
people actually start to break out of this? How do we start to get,
Mm.
less of what's familiar and more of what we want?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, again, it starts with self-awareness because you have to know that these cycles are actually happening or that you have these tendencies in the first place. Otherwise, you're not going to even break out of it. Like, there's no opportunity to break out of it at all. So for me, it involved doing a lot of reflection on why I am the way I am and how my childhood led me to be the way I am or created these kinds of anxieties that I was having. It reminds me of when I was in my teenage years and kind of my early 20s where I would create these cycles of busyness for myself and create these stressful containers that I put myself in where I didn't quite have enough time or energy to do all the things because that was what was familiar to me. And it wasn't until I started to think about why I was doing that that it all kind of made sense, which then gave me a way out. And what I realized was growing up, I had a very stressful, unsafe environment. And so what I did was I created these containers of busy work schedules that I could put myself in to protect myself from the crazy stuff that was going on in my house at the time. And it allowed me to kind of leave my body in a way and get into these creative projects that I had, or these things that I wanted to build, or just I wanted to put myself in some other situation than where I was so that I could survive. It was my coping mechanism. And I realized that if I was really busy with school, I wasn't getting as much negative attention from my parents. So it was keeping me safe. And it was also giving me a way to create a new life for myself after leaving home that would mean that I could leave that environment. So it kind of checked all the boxes at the time and it really did benefit me. And then I continued to do that throughout university, throughout my adult life, and realizing that, hang on a minute, like I'm not even in an unsafe environment now. Like I don't even need to be doing all these things. I don't need to be distracting myself from what's going on. I actually have control of my environment and the people who are around me. But I was continuing with what was familiar with me, which was just take on too much than you can actually handle. Give yourself less time than you actually need. Don't quite give yourself the resources so that you can thrive because you need to stay in that survival mode because that's what you're good at. That's what you know. So that was a self-perpetuating thing for many, many years. And it wasn't until I realized that hang on, that doesn't have to happen anymore. That was really beneficial to me back then, but that's not beneficial to me now. And then I realized how it was affecting other people in my life. My partner in particular, he was really getting affected by it because I would be relying on him to do like the housework and the grocery shopping and all these things that I didn't have time to do. And then I would get sick and then I would want him to take care of me. And then, there was all these responsibilities that kept piling up. And even though I knew I was resilient enough to do all of it and get through it, it wasn't fair on him because I was creating all this chaos and he was part of it. And he would say to me, well, I don't like seeing you this way and it's affecting me too. And my life is not fun. I'm not enjoying it. I'm just like picking up the pieces for you. I'm just supporting you. And then that was what kind of triggered all of these different events to transpire and then for me to start experimenting with, can I still get things done without suffering? Can I still accomplish things without pushing myself too hard or adding all this extra pressure? And so it was a very gradual period of experimentation to kind of see, is there another way, another reality that can be true that I am not familiar with? And you are really uncomfortable when you're experiencing that because you haven't before. But over time, it becomes more and more comfortable, and you kind of find those new neural pathways in your brain that strengthens that this is now an approach that I can take to the point where it does start to become the default.
That's so helpful to know because I know so many people will resonate with what you've shared. Like, burnout is like the final product or the final stage. But before that, it's you trying to, escape a certain childhood, memory. And then even before that, it's you feeling unsafe. Like you feel unsafe in a certain situation. So you use escapism and then you almost double down on the escapism. Then you then end up burning out. So I think that's so helpful to know because, I can resonate with that. When I was studying at university, I almost saw studying as an escape. I found it quite fun to study. I know that's really strange to say, but it was just an escape from not being the cool person in school, not having many friends. Like studying was how I got a lot of confidence because I was really good at studying. So if I'm not cool, well, at least I'm smart. And then it was escapism. So then it later led to burnout, I guess, at university.
Right. Yeah, and there's so many different reasons why we attach ourselves to certain behaviors. It might not be what we were talking about. It could be something completely different. Like, for
Mm,
example, I realized that when I was growing up, the only time I would really get attention from my parents was when I was sick because they were so busy with the other kids in my house. My mom worked from home. She had a lot of people coming and going, and my dad was always at work and not really around. So unless I was really sick, like I had an ear infection or I was throwing up or whatever, I had a really bad nightmare, I wouldn't get any attention because there was just no time for me. So in my adult life, I was recreating these kinds of situations where I would become sick, someone would have to give me attention, take care of me. That was the only way I knew how to get love, how to get affection. And then I had to retrain myself that you can have love regardless of whether you're sick or not, what you do, what you don't do. You don't have to get to that level. And so that was a whole new arena for me that I didn't even realize I was going into until I tracked it back to what was the benefit for me when I was originally doing that a lot. Like, because I got the love and attention I wanted. So then once you know what the benefit was, you can then ask yourself, well, how else can I accomplish that without the negative stuff attached to it? And you'll realize that there's a whole bunch of other ways you just didn't even think about it before.
Yeah, that is actually really powerful because it's a good example you've described there. Like thinking back to when you were younger, when you were sick, you got attention, and not even realizing it, you kind of recreated this as an adult. Because I'm sure from the people listening, they might not be able to straight away think of a situation where they recreated a childhood memory to get attention, to get love, to get validation. But all of us, if we aren't aware of these things, there's probably ways that we're trying to recreate how we can get attention or validation. I was doing it in a sense where it was I'd get validation from my grades at 14, and then even at 19, 20, 21, I was kind of recreating the same thing, even though it was harming me in a way.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And
Yeah,
this is why people stay in education for so long. And it's a really common thing is that
yeah,
we need the validation. We look to the validation and we look for that recognition that we're doing the right thing and we're pleasing the people. But then you kind of
mm,
reach the end of the line, you get a PhD or a postdoc or something, and then you're like, hang on, how do I end up like transitioning into the real world? And you don't know how
yeah,
because that's all you've ever known. And so it's, again, you're kind of just
mm,
delaying this process of self awareness and figuring out how you can be yourself in the world because we only know the dynamics that we've seen. That's how we learn how the world works. So we can't
mm.
expect ourselves to know all these other different dynamics until we actively choose to expose ourselves to them and feel uncomfortable and then ultimately not feel as uncomfortable.
That is the key word, like uncomfortable. I think there's a quote that says people would rather have a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And it sounds drastic, but it's so true. I've seen it
It's
so many
true.
times in even in relationships. We all have that friend that's like constantly complains about their partner never does this,
Mhm,
never does that, never takes them out, no flowers. But then they stay. It's 6 year
mhm.
relationship, 7 year relationship. And even though they're unhappy, I guess it's the familiarity. It's reassuring to know
Yeah.
this is what they know. Anything new it's just so strange, so scary. The thought of being single is just really strange and really scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if you haven't done it before, then you don't know if you can. I mean, maybe you've been in a situation where you have been single for an extended time and you've been forced to do everything independently and to support yourself financially and stand on your own 2 feet. But maybe the whole time you felt like an imposter, like that wasn't really how it was supposed to be. And then as soon as you got into a relationship again, those same patterns re-emerged and you attached yourself to that person. And now that becomes your identity because you're familiar with that. So again, we just have to observe these things and know that we are, humans like patterns. We like to do the same things. We like to see the same things. We're looking for evidence that what we know is true. And so if we're trying to do the opposite of that and have a new belief or a new habit or a new behavior, it is going to feel strange. It's going to feel maybe even unsafe or like it's bad for us. But in reality, it's not bad for us. It's just new. It's just different.
Mm. And I often tell people, like, you honestly just have to train yourself to feel like this is safe. Like, our nervous system, our brains are still like cavemen from the caveman era. It thinks that us putting our hand up in a lesson or standing up to our boss is like us being chased by a tiger. Like we're still just stressed and panicked, like we're cavemen. And I often tell people, like, just tell yourself that you're safe. It's okay. You're gonna survive. It sounds like trivial, like it's nothing, but honestly, just training yourself to like self-soothe and reassure yourself you're going to be okay, I find is the key.
Yes. Yeah, self-soothing has been a big part of my own development actually, and it started with me making voice notes to myself. So I make voice notes from a version of myself who is more confident, more empowered, more grounded, more intuitive. And then I kind of talk with myself, like
Mhm.
my present self and then this higher version of myself. And I'm a coach, so I naturally find myself in that coaching role. But a lot of us, if we're empaths, if we care about others, we're good at giving advice, we're good at giving support, we're good at giving encouragement, we're not necessarily taking our own advice. So when we have these actual conversations where we can express the resistance to something or how we feel about something, we can say, this doesn't feel safe, this doesn't feel good for me. But then another part of my brain is like, what, this actually could be good for you. We have to let it play out, because if we just force ourselves, it's not enough. That resistance means something and it's there for a reason. It's there to protect us because something bad happened in the past. And so we've got to take the time to let ourselves fully express it and be resistant, and then be open to changing our mind. If we think about, if someone comes to us and just says, well, I have this problem, whatever, and you just tell them, oh, do this, like that's not enough. Like they have to
Mm.
actually be open to hearing what you have to say, and they have to really take the time to deconstruct their own perspective and then introduce yours, and then think about the practical implications, and then think about, well, what support do I have in doing that? And so it's actually a pretty complicated, time consuming thing. And so we can't expect ourselves to just do the thing either, just be different, just show up anyway. That creates a lot of resistance. That's one of the reasons why things can be so draining on us, is we're going against what our nervous system actually wants for us. And so we find ourselves exhausted even if we're not even doing that much.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And what you've said kind of reminds me of how I think a lot of people sometimes maybe have, superficial problems of like, I'm overthinking or I'm procrastinating or I can never stick to good habits. And it's all, problems that we've all probably experienced before, but it's just this problem on the top. Usually there's like a deeper problem underneath, like an unmet need or a subconscious thing. And sometimes I think you can fix a problem with logic, like just reading a self-help book, or you can fix it like on the emotional level. And I find
Mm.
like fixing it on the emotional level probably like will fix it more long term as fix it. Honestly, not even fix it, but heal it almost. It's
Yeah.
easy to just tell someone do this step one, two, and three, but actually nervous system work or shadow work, healing work, journaling, voice notes from your
Mm.
higher self that actually helps you to kind of fix it on a deeper level.
Yeah, and also thinking of ourselves as the child version of ourselves. Like for example, if we're a 5-year-old and we fall over, we cut our knee open, it's bleeding, we cry. There's the practical side of it, of someone like putting a plaster on it, putting a band-aid on it and saying like, you're going to be okay. But then there's the psychological part of it, of like someone's coming in and helping me. They care about me. They're saying kind words to me. They're making me feel safe. They're doing something for me. I now have a stronger connection with them. I feel like I'm being cared for. Like that, we need that side of it too. It's not just about the band-aid. If we had the band-aid, but we
Mm.
had no context as to what that was, we might still be really scared about what's happening underneath, and
Mm.
so we've got to look at the two sides of the equation with any situation. And sometimes we need a lot more of the emotional support and we don't need any of the practical, and sometimes we need more of the practical and less of the emotional, but we don't know. And so we start to actually get honest with ourselves and express what's really going on. Like grief, for example, what can you really do when you're going through a lot of grief? There are some practical things you could do. You could like go to a person's grave, you could bring them flowers, you could light a candle. But really, like a lot of it is just emotional processing. You just have to feel what you feel. You've got to say things, you've got to cry, you've got to take some time and space. There's no practical solution for that. That's just part of what has to be done. And so that's a more extreme example, but like, sometimes we can have a very emotional reaction to something that doesn't seem like it would evoke an emotional reaction, but it does because of something that happened in our past, or because there's a greater meaning behind that thing for us than there would be for somebody else. And this is again why we can have conflicts with people where we're upset about something and they don't understand why we're upset. Even we don't understand why we're upset. It just seems like a stupid thing. But if we try to just push it down and say, oh, no, 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 it's nothing, that's what's causing a lot of these health issues and the burnout and the exhaustion, because we're not being honest with ourselves about what's really going on. Whereas if we look at that, we'll probably find that, this is triggering because it reminds me of this really traumatic thing that happened, and it's much bigger than the actual thing itself. And so how can anybody else support us if they don't know that? And how can we support ourselves if we're not aware of that?
Mm. Do you know what you said there about the practical and the emotional, the band-aid versus the "you're gonna be okay"? I think that's I never even thought of it that way, but that makes so much sense. It's
Mm.
almost why, both of us, and maybe I'm sure many people watching, like we fell into the trap of we did the practical stuff 'cause it's almost an escape. If I just bury myself in this distraction, bury myself in work, studies, corporate stuff, like that's almost a distraction. That's the practical to ignoring all the emotional stuff. Partly because we
Mm.
don't never learned how to. Maybe we never had a positive example of that. But I can see how now the cycle continues. We escape, we burn out, and then we don't know where to go from there.
Mm. Yeah, and then we have to find healthier ways of channeling that negative energy. So
Mm,
for the longest time, I would say, well, I have all this negative energy. I'm going to channel it into my work, and I was very successful by doing that because anytime I was angry, frustrated, hurt, whatever, I would grow my business and it would do really well. But then it's like you reach the top of the mountain and you look around and no one's there, and you don't really even want to be there, because you
mm,
missed the point that there was an opportunity for growth there that you didn't take. And there was a view that you could have seen that you just completely skipped over. And so then we realized, well, it's not that simple. It can't just be a practical thing. It's not just about doing, it's also about being. And so, how could I have approached that in a more grounded way? Like, how could I have honored what I was feeling and what I needed without focusing too much on just the wheels spinning all the time? Because I think that distraction can be so big that we miss what's really going on underneath.